Chains, Chapter 12. Becky sent me to fetch the Lady Seymour to help Madame get through having her husband arrested like that. The old lady lived 2 blocks north of Trinity Church, the one with the spears that scrape the sky. It's one of those old Dutch-style houses. Got a red door and a knocker that looks like a heart, Becky said. You can't miss it. The house was not that far from City Hall, along the street where soldiers with heavy axes were chopping down the row of tall poplar trees. Fortifications, a soldier explained to a cartman, to protect against the invasion. Any day now, they say. The red door made the house easy to find. I walked through a beautiful garden around the back. Neatly trimmed boxwood hedges created a path lined with yellow peony plants, lavender, daylilies, and honeysuckle. Mamma would have admired the roses. My fingers itched to pluck up the scraggly weeds that were crowded among them, but I dare not. I knocked at the back. The door was opened by the whitest girl I had ever seen. Her skin was pale as water, except for 2 flame-colored spots on her cheeks. Her eyebrows and eyelashes were invisible, and her eyes were a mix of pewter and blue. She wiped her hands on her apron and said something I didn't understand. "I've come for Lady Seymour," I explained. "Madame Lockton requires her presence." She frowned. "What will you?" "What did you say?" I asked. "An Augenblick, Alstifblatt," she said before she closed the door in my face. What was an Augenblick? New York was stranger every passing day. I knocked again, but there was no answer. I was about to walk home when I heard Lady Seymour's voice through the open window. A moment later the door opened, and she stood there in the kitchen. I curtsied, proper-like. "Pardon, ma'am, but they've arrested the master. Madame is poorly." She nodded. "I've been hunting Loyalists all day, and I told Anne it would come to this. Come inside, child. Isabel, is it not?" The kitchen was larger than the Locktons, with a tiled hearth and copper pots hanging on the wall. A smoke-colored cat curled itself around my ankles, its tail in the shape of a question mark. "Please, sit down. You must be hungry." I perched on the edge of a chair. Lady Seymour poured me a mug of fresh milk. My surprise at having a proper lady do so must have shown on my face. "You could use some building up," she said, as she pushed a plate of molasses cookies towards me. "Eat, and tell me everything." She turned to her servant, who stood by the hearth. "Wilt jas Elspeth in even da Meubles estoffen?" The strange girl bobbed at once and left the room, the pale pink ribbons from her back and her cap trailing behind. "She speaks only Dutch," Lady Seymour explained, "and shows no inclination to learn English, I'm afraid. Now, a bite, and the events." I chewed the cookie quickly and took a sip of milk and recounted near everything, though I neglected to mention my role as the household spy. She listened carefully as I spoke and asked plenty of questions. "Did Elihu say anything to the men who arrested him? Did he give them any names?" "Not in my hearing, ma'am." She sat back in her chair. "He's in no danger so long as he stays quiet." She broke off a piece of cookie and popped it into her mouth and chewed. "I imagine Anne is in a lather." "Yes, ma'am," I said carefully. "She told Becky to pack the trunk for Charleston." Lady Seymour shook her head. "I don't blame her, but fleeing would ensure that the rebels would take everything." "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled. I took an overly large bite of cookie, certain she would send me back straight away. She tapped my forefinger on the table as she pondered her rings flashing in the light. "Right," she said firmly, having come to a decision. "I will write a note for you, and take you to the lawyer's office before you go home, and another for Anne, telling her that Elihu will soon be set free." The Dutch girl came back in the kitchen and said something I could not make out at all. Lady Seymour rose from her chair and motioned for me to stay seated. "Finish your cookies, please, and drink a second glass of milk. You can't run errands for me unless properly nourished."